Get this thing going. So welcome to those of you who are signed on. This is the first webinar, Ask a Pro. So something I kind of had an idea I wanted to bring onto, just a format where we can ask questions, and some people that I personally kind of respect and have a lot of admiration for. One of the first ones is going to be Clint Bailey. He is a commercial insurance provider, and he has been in the business for ages, and I've been working with him, so I think he has a lot of insight. He's also very pragmatic about things. So if you have questions, well, I'll be kind of advocating and talking about my perspective on the critical nature of insurance. Next is going to be Hillary. She's with a lending institution that our partners in Northern California have been working with her for some time, and we find that anybody that we refer to her, she's also a great source of information. So thank you, Hillary, for being here. And then I think probably one of the stars of the show is Mr. Ryan O'Connell. He is the founder of How to ADU, the Facebook page that has grown when I joined it at 3,000 all the way up to over almost 8,000, and is a strong advocate for just affordable housing and housing in general. So welcome, everybody. First, we're going to talk about a little bit of best practices. If you're here and you have a question, that's what we're here for. We want to kind of ask those. So put them in the Q&A. You can kind of put them in the chat, but we'd like to, if you can put them in the question and answer that's on the bottom, then we can kind of make sure that we've answered them.
Another cool feature is once you put your question in the Q&A, other people can go upvote the questions that they also have. So we can prioritize. And even if you don't know what questions you have, you can pop into the Q&A and just upvote other people's questions. And that's a way to participate.
Thank you, Ryan. I think that's great. So Clint, I want to start with you, because one of the things I get a lot of, or I see a lot of, is that I don't really think people they're that aware of how important having the right kind of insurance is. When whether you're doing having a general contractor, you're going from an architect to then hiring a general contractor, and then they start getting all the subs and they're on your property, and I think most homeowners think that, or don't think that, there's an insurance issue or an insurance component. And one of the things I've been posting is about the additionally insured certificate of liability, or being named, or having yourself named as a certificate holder, which, as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong, that if somebody were to do some damage to your property, let's say the contractor broke something, that then because you're a certificate holder, the homeowner could then go directly to the insurance company. You wouldn't have to go through the contractor themselves.
Well, you bring up a good point, and there's a few different lines of insurance. If we're talking about setting up a home, and that's kind of what we're discussing here, is we have a prospective home developer that's going to go out and buy, say, a tiny home, and they're going to put this tiny home on a piece of land. What kind of insurance do they need? What kind of protection do they need? Well, the key thing is two lines of coverage. First coverage is builder's risk. When construction processes are taking place, when you have an actual construction site taking place, normal property insurance does not cover any kind of damage that might happen to the home at that point. So once the home gets delivered to the site, typically, in that delivery process, you obviously, if you're buying one of these, you need to make sure that whoever is doing the transport manufacturer of your home is covering that home while it's sitting on a truck or being towed behind a truck. Because again, normal insurance is not going to work in those conditions. You need to vet that with whoever you're doing with the transporter or the developer, that we will have coverage while that home's in transit. But once it gets to the job site, that's typically where it becomes your responsibility. So let's say you're developing on a park. The home gets delivered, the home gets set down. At that point now, the home needs to be set up. You're going to need what's called a builder's risk policy, and that will provide you coverage while the construction, the whole setup process is taking place. You could buy these in 3-month installments, 6-month installments, depending upon how long it's going to take for the home to be built. That covers the property section of it. That covers it if it burns down, if it gets damaged, basically through that whole construction process, you're protecting your investment in that home. But that doesn't provide you liability. And you brought up the liability piece of this. What is your protection in the event that somebody gets injured and this home is titled in your name and they decide to sue you as a result for getting injured at this site? That is where you need liability insurance. Now, typically, if you hire a licensed contractor to do this work for you, somebody that carries a license in the state of California, you also want to verify that they have general liability insurance. And that contractor, this is the typical way, will provide the liability to you while they're on the job site. So while there's a setup process going on, the general contractor that is in charge of doing this job should be providing you with the liability to do the job. And they will name you as, meaning when I say the home buyer, you as the home buyer, as additional insured on their insurance policy. So the coverage will extend to any injuries that might happen to a third party that happens to be on the site. Very important that this is taking place. Now, what if you don't hire a GC to do this job and you decide, I think you mentioned a little earlier, that maybe you do it as an owner builder or something along those lines?
Yeah,
then it's going to be your responsibility to go out and secure general liability insurance for this job.
For each one of the trades. So if you have somebody who's doing some excavating, who's digging out the footings, who's putting in the metals, pouring the concrete. So you have a concrete contractor. You need the GL from them as well.
You're going to get a GL for the premise for yourself. Then every sub that comes onto the job. So if you're acting as the GC in this circumstance, every sub that comes on the job, you need to secure a certificate of insurance from those subcontractors. The GC normally does this. That's what they're doing. They're forcing that every sub that comes on the property to name them as additional insured. And they're doing that on behalf of you. But if you don't take on a GC, then you're going to need to make sure that you are doing the diligence to make sure that every subcontractor that comes onto the site names, not only carries general liability insurance, but they also name you, the home builder, as additional insured. Now that's for liability. There's also workers' comp that we deal with too. And in the state of California, this is incredibly important too.
It is.
Because the way our laws are written in California, if you are hiring somebody to come onto your site that is not licensed to do this work in the state of California, you're becoming, in essence, an employer to that person. You're becoming their employer. And if that person gets injured while working on developing or building or setting this home, you're going to be the one that's responsible for paying their medical bills for, however long. If it's disability, it could be for, 20, 30 years that you're paying on this. And it's very risky to go out and hire people that are not licensed to do this type of work.
Let me ask a question, because one of the things that I've run into sometimes is where somebody says that they have a contractor's license and they have insurance, and they might say that and you might look at it on the contractor's website. For the state of California, and it says they only have one employee, and then you see 6 on the job site.
Yep. Great question. What you're talking about is the state of California allows sole proprietors. Basically, if I am a contractor and I state that I'm the only one that works for my company, I can get workers' compensation insurance waived. Those contractors do that to cut their costs, obviously, yes. And they will go out and yes, all of a sudden they show up to the job site and there are 4 people that are working there. In that event, yes, you can be cited as the employer in that circumstance.
So the homeowner would be the employer.
The homeowner ultimately can be the one that is found.
And this is where I think a lot of people get thrown off, because they'll say that somebody has insurance. Oh, I have it. Here it is. But no one really drills down and says, well, you're the sole proprietor. And I actually got a bid from somebody that had that. And then, because I've been doing property development for 20 years, I then had another contractor who was working on my neighbor's house. And he said, oh, here's everything. And then I asked for, the certificate of liability. Well, it was his buddy's license he was using, contractor's license, and they refused to name me as additionally insured, and because it was like, whoa, no, no, we're not going to do that. And I was like, so I think that it's really important that everybody kind of gives this a lot more attention, asks the questions that they need to, because this is complex stuff. If you're subcontracting, if you're hiring subcontractors to do various trades, and they have a bunch of people on, find out, get the insurance certificates that Clinton was mentioning, and you need to ask the questions like, where's your workers' comp insurance? And if they don't have workers' comp insurance and you have a bunch of people showing up, that's a big red flag.
Absolutely. And, the certificates that come out, it's called an Accord 25 is the technical term for it, an Accord 25. And on that form, they will have a section for general liability insurance and a section for workers' compensation insurance. Both of them should be listed on that form. If they're not listed on their form, and they'll have policy numbers, expiration dates, you do need to vet all this information and verify. And then their license number, go on it, like you were saying, it's the California State Contracting Licensing Board. It's available online, and you can go and run their license number and verify it's the same person that's talking to you that is also attached to that license. If it's not the same person, something's kind of fishy and something might be a little amiss. And that's it's homework that needs to be done, because in the event of a claim, it can really be messy.
And you bring that up because my wife is a workers' comp defense attorney. She's the one who would be defending the employer, and what it is, somebody could claim any injury in the state of California. You really don't have to show that you had this massive injury before somebody is going to say, I think I'm going to get a payday from you by saying that I'm injured. And I don't think it doesn't happen that often, but I live around it all the time. I really like raising the flag up to go, watch out, be careful, make sure that you have all the proper insurance, because what is at risk is the fact that you're going to be the employer, looked at as the employer, and you're going to be responsible for all of their medical expenses. So, correct?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And what you were just bringing up there, which is key, and we're kind of going back to another position that we talked about. If this is a sole proprietor contractor that's just bringing random people onto the job, a lot of times some of those random people are really not people that are working for them at all times. And so they really don't know what the motivation of this person is. And some of these people do realize, and they come to this realization, that it's easy to get a free dime based on our California workers' comp laws that allow them to, it's a no-fault insurance. It's not like they have to establish that there was really, it's just no fault. If you're claiming that you're injured on that site, then, now, of course, they've done a better job of getting some medical providers that they have to go see and, some vetting on that side. But it's, it's still something you just don't want to be involved in if at all possible. Make sure you're using contractors that are licensed for this type of work and carry the right insurance.
Yeah. Thank you, Clint.
Can I throw in sometimes contractors don't like answering these questions, and it could be a really early sign that if you're the type of person who wants to do your homework, and they're the kind of person who gets a little prickly when you start asking responsible questions, like respectful questions, it's probably not a good match, right? And that's good to know early on. Go find somebody who doesn't mind your questions, because these are reasonable questions when posed the right way. And then the other thing is, if you're looking for a classy way to ask about this stuff, I think it's very common to just be like, hey, how many people do you employ versus what jobs do you sub out? How many jobs are you doing right now? And am I going to get your permanent employees or sub crews? And when you ask questions like that, those are very they should be all about those questions. As soon as you start talking about insurance and stuff, some people get spidey, the spider sense tingling, but you're kind of getting the same answer in both cases. So they're good questions, keep in your back pocket.
Thank you, Ryan. I think that's really, really good. Clint, I know that you may need to go, but if you want to hang on for any...
Sure, I'm fine.
Please do. And I want to kind of, hand it off to Hillary, because one of the things that we got in a poll that I put on the thing is how do you pay for an accessory dwelling unit? What are the ways? Do I have to go to my savings account? Do I have to go to my retirement account? Can I tap into the equity into my property, or do I have a construction loan option?
So yes, and yes, and yes, and then insurance on top of that. So there's a few different ways to finance an ADU. The most common way right now is a construction loan, and the reason for that, because the question I always get is my property going to appraise? And the short answer is probably not for what you're paying to actually build the ADU. Not because it's not worth it, because the lending world doesn't operate on cost to build. The lending world operates on construction value in terms of resale. So they're looking at comparable sales, and is a house that's like yours with an ADU like yours going to sell, and what is it going to sell for? And that's where the lending world hasn't quite caught up to the ADU landscape. And for the past almost over a decade now, I have been fighting the lending world on this, and we're finally getting somewhere. But it's going to take another 10 years before ADU appraisals catch up to what the value actually is for the homeowner and the ability to utilize a property in multiple ways. So the short answer is yes, you can finance all those ways, but let's break it down. And then I did just see a question: how do ADUs affect property taxes? Depending on the county you're in, so I'm going to go down to the county level. The county tax assessor is going to assess that as livable, taxable living space, which means your property taxes will be impacted by the value of your ADU that they assess it at. Not what the lender assesses it at, not what the builder values it at, but what the county gives you cost per square foot for that dwelling. And then they will adjust your property taxes accordingly. Now, depending again on what county you're in, they will reassess after completion of the build. So hypothetically, you start in March of 2022, your ADU is done 4 months later. So now we're in, let's say, July, August. I'm just going to push that time frame out to July, August. The county tax assessor will reassess for the following tax year. So it's not an instantaneous hit. It actually can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months to get your property reassessed. Does that make sense? If you have any other questions, throw them in the Q&A log. And again, depending on the county that you're in, because if I'm looking at Marin County versus LA County, right? I'm looking at two completely different tax structures. So when we're looking at two different tax structures, the value per square foot is going to be different. And I will say that the highest taxed county right now that I'm aware of in in California is LA County and the surrounding areas. The worst ADU valuation I saw for taxes was actually in Temecula. And that one brought their property taxes up $12,000 a year. It was pretty insane. We're fighting it. So, sorry, I had popcorn right before this. And that's just one of you never know quite what you're going to get. But with taxes, I will say this: if you're unsure of what the value is going to be, go to the county, get a meeting, and ask them, hey, I'm going to build, here are my plans. I'm going to build a 600 square foot, single level detached ADU. What is the range my taxes will increase? And they will give you a range, and it will need to fall within that range because it's truly based on taxes for that county. So that's a good way to assess it there. Does the county use average price per square foot to assess value? No, it's a little different by county. So you're going to have the average price per square foot has nothing to do with the valuation of your ADU. It's going to be the county laws, what the taxation is in that state, what bonds and levies have been passed in your community. So all of that gets factored into the price per square foot. What ADU loan products typically have the lowest interest rates, assuming you have a lot of equity in your existing home? Cool. So two things: home equity line of credit, easiest, fastest thing to qualify for. Home equity line of credit is a variable rate second mortgage. It's not fixed. The rates are going to be a little higher than a first, but you can tap into up to 90% of the existing value of your home, what it is right now. That's the cheapest option because there's no closing costs and you only pay interest on what you draw. Option number 2 is a cash out refi. That can be a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year, or 30-year fixed mortgage. You can also do an ARM if you really want to. You're going to lock in that payment. It is going to be a mortgage on your home which means you are going to get your 1098 tax write-off. Yay, we got to get it where we can take it. And that is going to have closing costs associated with it. They're minimal in comparison to, say, a construction loan. And it will allow you to tap into 75 to 80% of the existing value. So if you're a homeowner who has a lot of value, that would be the loan program I would push you to before I would suggest a construction loan. I think it's most important that if you have the resources already, utilize those, don't pay more than you need to. If you don't have equity, that's where the home style renovation loan, I saw that on the Q&A, home style renovation loans. Those are going to be the most expensive type of loan, that or a traditional construction loan, but we get to use future value of your property, which means I would go to David and say, hey, give me the plans for what you're going to build for these people. Tell me a lot about what the finishes are on this property. He gives me a description of materials and a full scope of work. And I say, great, this property is going to appraise at X with my appraiser. And we are going to use the value of the finished product to fund your loan, which gives you more equity out of the gates. It's not dollar for dollar. That's where people get a little stuck. It's not dollar for dollar, but I would say about 80% of the people that come to me for construction loans, I will maybe fund about 50 to 60% of all of the people that come to me for construction loans, with a mix of cash down and equity in the house, so on and so forth.
Hillary, somebody in the chat feature said if you could repeat the name of the second type of loan after the HELOC.
Cash out refinance.
Okay.
This is just tapping into equity in your existing home.
And
I will say this. Go ahead, David.
Which is the quickest? Because in my understanding is like the HELOC you can get in very short order.
2 weeks, a week and a half. Cash out refi, 30 days. And then a construction loan is completely dependent on the build package. So we have to have a project package from our builder, from David, and then the 30-day loan process starts, because we're appraising to what you're building. So we need to know what you're building. HELOCs are the fastest. I will say this. I did just help a client who had a couple properties. Not everybody has that, I realize, but I just want to give you guys an example of how creative we can be. She had an investment property that she owned, and she had a primary home. And the investment property, she owed about 150,000 on it. It was worth about 400. And then her primary home, she owed about 250 or so on it, and it was worth 600. And instead of trying to do a construction loan and get enough equity to do a $400,000 ADU, which is exactly what she wanted to do, we did a cash out refi on both of her properties, combined the equity, got her payments really low on both of the properties. She still cash flowed her rental. And then we took all of that money and built her an ADU on her primary residence, which is now paying back the roughly $500,000 mortgage she has on her primary home from the long-term rents she's getting from that ADU. So there's, it depends on the situation. And I tell everybody, don't just listen to blanket statements. If you want to know what your situation is, pick up the phone and call somebody like me. Take 5 minutes. Let us ask you some very personal questions. I'm going to ask you what your credit score is. I'm going to get down and dirty into your mortgage details. But then I can put together a very quick summary of, here are the types of loans. Let's explore them. Or, hey, we need to pause. I need you to work on your credit. Or we need to save a little bit more and we're close. We're going to actually get a game plan together. When you want to build an ADU, it's not always going to be fast, but if you're willing to put in the time, we can get you there.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Hillary.
Yeah.
As I think everybody can kind of appreciate, there's a lot of detail to the various products that are out there. And as Hillary mentioned, call and contact a lender that you have a relationship with, or or you've seen somebody recommend someplace, and just ask the question. Have that kind of doctor's visit, as I kind of like to look at it when you sit with a lender, because they are going to ask you the personal questions. So just be prepared for that.
I have a question about that, actually. So there's a couple of people in the Facebook group who say that they're lenders and they're hard money people.
Yep.
Is there a good way to know that somebody's like a licensed broker who's shopping like really official financial products versus like a guy in a van who's going to give me money for the ADU and then like wake up in a bathtub and I'm missing organs? Like, what's
yes, okay. That was graphic.
Well, they come with bathrooms, Hillary.
I really didn't need to go there. Like, I just had a serial killer moment.
Guido.
Yeah, okay. So yes, there is this beautiful thing called an NMLS number, National Mortgage Licensing System number. And if you are a licensed mortgage lender, you have to have an NMLS number. And y'all can go to nmls.com or can't remember which one it is. I should know this. I've been doing this for 12 years. It's one of the two. And you can type in my number and I'll even put it in the chat. You guys can text this out. You can, I didn't put it in the chat. Could someone put that in the open, answer, dismiss thing for me? You can type that in and it's actually going to bring up my record as a mortgage lender. It's going to tell you that I'm not a felon. I get my fingerprints done every year. I'm a good lender, what companies I've worked for. It actually gives you a list of all of the institutions I've worked for in the last 12 years. So you'll be able to see that I worked for US Bank 6 years ago and a small brokerage firm, and that I've been with Umpqua Bank since 2015. If someone is not willing to give you an NMLS number or they don't have one, chances are they're probably not the right person to talk to. Additionally, banks, so bankers who do home equity lines, they also have to have an NMLS number. So if you're talking to a banker, they also have to have one. Hard money lenders don't. They're on capital financing on private lines. It's a whole set of different rules. So if you're looking for a true residential, lowest interest rate possible loan, start with NMLS.
And it's serious stuff. These are big loan products. So like, you know, I'm being glib, but I see conversations in the group and I just want everybody to be with responsible, regulated lenders. So use that NMLS.
NMLS. I know it's hard, isn't it? It's a mouthful. Also, if you guys at any given time want to know if a lending institution is solid, lending institutions have an NMLS. So they are also assigned one. Umpqua Bank, where I work, has its own, and I am licensed under them. So if you're looking at, I'm going to use a totally non-existent lender, ABC123 lender, and you're like, dude, this guy's sketchy. If you go look at their NMLS and they're being sanctioned by the SEC for fraud, you probably shouldn't be talking to them. So it's a really simple, easy system. It's as simple as going to Google and typing it in and asking, what's the NMLS of Umpqua Bank? Searching it, and off you go. It'll take you 1 minute tops.
Thank you. And I think the other thing, Ryan, is that people really haven't touched on it, but they're looking for hard money because it's quick and easy. The interest rates are amazingly high in most cases. I mean, we're talking, close to 10%, if not higher. And, if they're going to do a deed restriction on your property and something goes sideways, that's, like you said, the bathtub.
Yeah, I get that there's an important role for that to play too, because like if you do like the construction loan setup that Hillary's talking about, right? It's loan number one has an inferior rate, and at the end of the construction, you do a takeout loan, and you're back to a normal rate. So I get why people are tempted to go hard money and then do a second step, but just remember that professional real estate developers. Capital is everything. That's the big piece. That's where every project goes upside down. And so whether you're successful or unsuccessful is really, really important when it's your house, your yard, your money, your credit. You're not protected. Most of you aren't protected by having like a corporation that's taking out the loan. So like be really serious about it. Don't do a two-step dance with a stranger. Like make sure that the first step is with somebody who is regulated by the government.
I want to piggyback on that, Ryan, because there's something that a lot of people don't realize, and I haven't mentioned it in the Facebook group because I don't want to scare people. But I get a call at least once a day. I had a call at 9 o'clock this morning. I'm halfway through my renovation in my ADU and I ran out of money. Can you help me? Here's the thing. And I see Clint's like, nope, she can't help you. I can't. Lenders cannot help you once you break ground. If you break ground on an ADU build and you start construction, you've opened up every lien window under the sun. And a title company and a lender, they won't touch you because now you've got a liability issue with people on site, and we can't come in and put a loan on there. Because if someone breaks their foot, like Clint was saying, and puts a lien on your property saying, hey, you owe me money, the bank loan gets put in second position. And from a risk perspective, we're not going to do it. We're like, sorry, you're SOL. Now that's not pleasant, but would you lend me money if you knew somebody broke their foot and I owed them 100 grand? Probably not, because you know you're never going to get paid back. So what I tell people, if you don't have enough money to build your ADU in cash, find the funding first. Don't break ground, because it will be a much more painful process for you. I am seeing people take out $40,000 and $50,000 personal lines of credit and personal loans at 12% to try to get this crap built. And I say crap because at that point you're rushing it. You're paying for crap items. You get a very bad finished product. And then what happens is it doesn't appraise. So you can't pay off that $40,000 line of credit at 12% because your property doesn't appraise. So the horror stories are very real, but it's the people that aren't doing the work up front, like Ryan's talking about, that are the ones that get caught. And they're not working with builders like David and Yimby and really looking through the due diligence period. I'm the last piece. I need to be the last piece to make sure everything falls in line so that when you do build, that process is seamless. And when I say I get a call a day, guys, I'm not exaggerating. I've written down over the last 2 years, I've actually taken to making my assistant write out who's called me. We now have a list of over 2,000 customers who've called us with incomplete builds, and about half of them have still not been able to refinance because we check in about every 3 months. And it's very real. So when we're talking about protect yourselves from a liability perspective, working with the right builders, having a builder in your back pocket is, in my opinion, after doing this for 12 years, is one of the secret keys to building an ADU at the moment, because supply chains are insane, costs are absolutely astronomical, and nobody knows how to deal with the counties because they keep changing rules on us like every week. And so it's just protect yourself is what it comes down to, and make the right choices before you jump into the long game.
And if I could piggyback on that real quick, because you did bring up a good point. Same thing goes with insurance. Do not, a lot of times a contractor will come out and say, yeah, we can have this project done for you in 3 months, we'll have it, or 6 months. Buy longer terms, because the same goes for insurance. If your policy expires and the job is not done, the way these builders risk policies work is they end when the keys are handed to you and the keys are ready for occupancy. That's called certificate of occupancy. Once we have that, then the insurance needs to change from a builder's risk policy into a homeowner's or dwelling fire policy, however you plan to use the place. But if your builder's risk runs out before certificate of occupancy, carriers do not want to get on another term after the construction project's already begun. They're going to say no. So you need to make sure that you get the same insurance company to go from project start to project end. And you cannot have it run out or expire before that term. So just another heads up on that.
So it's something to be really kind of important to say, okay, if they've started construction and their insurance policy expires in 2 months, you need to make sure that.
Not the contractors. No, I'm talking about the builder's risk. This is as a buyer, you need to protect your assets. So when the asset's being, put on the site and the construction process begins, the carriers that write these projects do not want to pick them up once they're midterm. They want to take them from start to finish, because the bulk of the risk is at the finish. It's not at the start, it's at the end. And so if you're writing with a builder's risk company, they don't want to pick up just the end. They want to pick up the entire job. So you just make sure that you buy enough insurance. So the contractor tells you that it's going to take them 6 months, buy 9 or buy 12. You'll always get a refund if you get the certificate occupancy beforehand, as opposed to trying to buy cheaper terms by getting a shorter term or time frame. You're just going to not find another carrier to get on board.
And Clint, are there companies or entities that specialize in builder's risk? I know you specialize in commercial, but
yes, and I was answering some of those questions earlier on the chat feature. This is not, you don't just call up your local farmer's agent and they go, yeah, sure, let's go. There are specific carriers that do this type of insurance. So you have to contact an independent agent. Those of us that specialize in this obviously know the markets to go to and write this stuff. But yeah, you have to go to a specific program that will do builder's risk for these types of homes. Because it's not necessarily ground up construction. It's a little unique. You're bringing in a prefab in most circumstances, right? We're dealing with homes that are manufactured in a certain site, and then they're being brought to another site where they're being set up.
Yeah, or that which you've talked about and alluded to, which is Title 25 manufactured homes. This kind of thing is going to cover whether you're doing that or you're doing a Title 24 UBC compliant stick built, or you're doing an off-the-shelf design build, or you're doing a kit. It just kind of depends on the codes to kind of talk about. But there's going to be construction on your property, and that's how you want to protect yourself.
Yes. And then another point that I was thinking as you guys were going through is it depends on the circumstance. This is why you always just want to talk to an agent. Is it depends upon the circumstance that you're doing. If you're building this on a piece of property that you already own, where you have a home already, there's already liability insurance through your homeowner's policy. You could talk to your homeowner's carrier, let them know, okay, we're planning on doing this, because technically they're picking up that exposure, because homeowners policies are based on your premise address. And so if you are putting like a secondary structure on your actual home site, you need to let your homeowners carrier know that you're doing this, so that they understand that the liability is going to be extended. I can't tell you how they're going to respond, but you are afforded some workers' comp coverage under your homeowner's policy, and you're afforded some extended liability. But when you are doing a big project like this, they're going to want you to have a GC on there that is licensed and insured.
While you're going down that track, once you're finished and you start getting, maybe you get a tenant in, and it's not your family, what do you do then? What
renters insurance? They have to buy a renter's liability policy. You'll still be responsible for insuring the dwelling for burning down, et cetera. But you do want to make sure that you get that your tenants come in and buy what's called a renter's policy, that they're providing some liability for themselves, and if any guests they bring over, that they have some primary liability there to protect you. Not only that, but when you buy a renter, or when you mandate your tenants to have a renter's policy, you get what's called fire legal liability. And in the event that the renter is responsible for burning your place down, you have some liability on their policy to pay the claims, as opposed to your carrier paying the claim, assuming that they're responsible for the fire, which in most cases they are. Leaving something on the stove, or smoking in bed, or something along those lines.
Yeah, anything like that. We got about 20 minutes left, and one of the topics that I think that I really want, I'm excited about Ryan answering, is that we get a lot, is how do you finding a good contractor? How do you find people to work with? How do you even begin the process of deciding what to do if you want an accessory dwelling unit? I get this asked all the time. And then in the group, I've seen so many sort of tangents of things going off in a million different directions. I wanted to give you some time to kind of talk about what your experience is with that question.
This is a hard one, guys. I think, everything depends on your project, right? You're the most important character in your story. So some people will have a lot of success with one of the most traditional paths, which is you find an architect who is a customer service representative during the whole process, or you find a GC who likes doing customer service, right? Every GC is kind of their own business too. Some of them love it, some of them don't, and they should know that about themselves by the time you meet them. And that person will hopefully be a really strong point person throughout the process. What I see a lot in the group, and so if I stray from that happy path, if you want to save money, and everybody does, then you start getting multiple bids from lots of different types of people who do lots of different parts of this whole big A to Z process. And I think you can build a team to accomplish your goals if you, have a really good sense of how to do this from A to Z. You can build a less conventional team. So if you've built a house before, there's a much better chance that you know how to get from A to Z with like a like a Sandlot hodgepodge team of like misfits. If you do not know how to build a house, get it permitted, get it financed, and go from A to Z, and like know how to overcome all of the stuff that happens on HGTV, but like for real, then don't build the misfit team. Like go out and consider that it is worth spending the money on the traditional team, on the guys who know what they're doing, who do these projects a lot. And to find them, if you don't know how to identify them by the price tag, you also can ask questions: how many ADUs have you built? Building ADUs, I think, is a little bit different than building houses. And my proof of that is how many people call me every day and say, I thought he was a builder. He built so many houses, or this architect is like the most experienced architect in my region. They don't know the first thing about this permitting process. I'm like, well, ADUs use a different set of laws, and you got a really experienced person, but they don't know about ADUs. Or like your builder has built a bunch of mansions, but they're not used to the Title 24 requirements on an 800 square foot unit with tons of windows, which is totally different, right? Yeah. And they're doing insane things because the regulation requires us to overbuild them a little bit. And your builder just didn't know that when he bid the project, or she bid the project. And so they were going off on a completely different tangent. So I suggest going with the traditional team if you don't know how to do this already. I suggest asking specifically whether they built ADUs or not, and like get some customer references. Then it's just like interviewing for a job. And then lastly, I think to some extent, even when you work with the A teams, you gotta just use common sense to make sure everybody's well managed and incentivized to be successful. So like somebody called me the other day, said that they had a 2-year-old bid from a contractor, and they wanted to know how they could force the contractor to honor that quote. And I was like, hold on. Let's say that you have that agreement, right? And that you find some legal way to force the contractor to honor that quote. Don't. Prices have changed. That builder will hate you. They will be losing money every time they appear on the project, and they will be incentivized to do a terrible job for you. Now, go back to them and have an honest conversation about ways to like, hey, you were so good before, can we keep the competitive, and like have an adult conversation, and maybe you'll still get a good rate because you're being a human. But like, don't try to force people into giving you the best price possible, because there's strings attached every time, right? What's another good example? If you get an owner builder, which I often recommend, on these small ADU projects, a lot of the time owner builder makes more sense than full-fledged architect and then GC, and then especially on conversions. But you want to think about like when that owner builder, sorry, I'm saying owner builder, I mean design builder, my bad. Yeah. When you get that design builder in there, when they're doing the design part, you want them to be thinking hard about the design to make the build as cost effective as possible. Now, if they're giving you the design for free and they're making all their margin on the build, they're not incentivized to do a really thoughtful job on the design. And it's not their fault, right? You structured the deal so that they only care about the build. If you split it up and say, yeah, I love design build, but can you do the design and then bid on your own design? Then that's a very different proposition. Now they're going to have to put some effort into the design being the most cost effective, and then also put some effort in on the bidding process. Not everybody wants to do that, but it's a good example of like, if you set up the incentives right, it can work, and everybody who's competent can do a good job. If you set up the incentives wrong, you're kind of telling them like, hey, I'll pay you more if you do a bad job on the design part. And that's a weird situation to put yourself in, right? So if all of that sounds really easy, like the 3 things I just said, then like maybe you could be an owner builder. I would suggest going and taking some online courses. They cost a few $100. Cole Peterson's got one, and he's like the granddaddy ADUs. I'll drop a link in the chat. It's an affiliate link. But like if you can invest, if you think it sounds easy and you don't mind investing a bunch of time and a little bit of money, then that's a good sign, because you're supposed to not mind investing a little to save a bunch. But if any of that sounds tricky, don't do it. Get the A team, get the traditional team. That's my thing.
I want to kind of ask more of a 3rd grade kind of question, because some of us, or maybe some people here maybe, and who might be watching this, may not understand the difference between an architect and a designer. And could you talk about that, Ryan?
Well, architects are licensed, and so the same way that we talked about the NMLS thing, like architects have a legal responsibility to oversee the whole project, stamp it, and then they're like liable for a lot of stuff. And that's my baby explanation. Design, and you know, a good example is even at an architect firm, there are designers, right? And everybody's working into the architect who's stamping the whole plan set. I don't want to sound mean. Everybody can be a designer, right? You can yes. say designer pretty quickly.
Everybody can get some software.
That's it. And so and you know, you draw to scale. Maybe you don't even draw to scale. You can still tell people you're a designer. So just, you know, be careful. That said, like I said, design build makes a ton of sense for these smaller projects. You don't legally need an architect on timber construction, like type 5 or whatever it's called, under 3 floors. Like, so there's, you know, you're allowed to do it. You're even allowed to do your drawings on your own. You know, if you've got a city who's willing to walk you through the ABCs. But like, just because you can, just because you're allowed, doesn't mean it's the best way to get to the finish line, if that makes sense.
Ooh, I want to piggyback on that. Can I piggyback on that, David?
Please.
Okay, so just seeing this from a lending perspective, because I have to see the full set of plans and I have to see the full construction breakdown. Mm-hmm. And when the architect or designer and the builder are not on the same page, you're going to get halfway through construction and you're going to have upsells on the build side because the architectural plan wasn't done right. So when you're building an ADU, the specs that an ADU has to be built in the state of California, and it's different by county, there's overlaying rules, but then you've got different easements and different restrictions and different height management that you have to build to. Make darn sure that if you're not working with an architect design build firm and your architect is separate from your builder, that they are absolutely communicating. Because if your architect over designs your ADU and your builder tries to build it at that, you've just blown your budget. Mm-hmm. So you've got to keep everybody in line. And if you don't want to keep everyone in line, then you need to hook the two parties up at the beginning and have the conversation with both and give them your budget. Because if an architect has free reign, they're going to design you the world. And then you're going to have to go, oh, no, I don't want the world. I just want Pluto. So can you please bring it down a little? And this will save you not only time, but it's going to save you a ton of money if you do this up front, because your architect isn't going to go through a full set of plans, or your designer, and your builder's not having to rewrite a bunch of stuff. You're helping all parties involved get you to the finish line that much faster.
Mm-hmm. And even there's even more reasonable examples, right? Like you go, architecture designer says, hey, these are the windows I picked for the plan, right? Makes a totally reasonable choice for budget. But then the builder you pick works with a different supplier who has different manufacturer relationships and doesn't have good pricing or timelines on those windows. Like, you need to go back and forth and iterate, especially right now with all the supply chain stuff. You don't want a window that delays the project by 12 weeks. You don't want a window that a glass door that expands your budget by $20,000 because of what's happening right now in the market. You want a builder and an architect or designer who have their stuff enough together that they can iterate and be like, hey, this thing happened at the job and we're going to adapt based on your inputs, right? And hopefully they do that well.
And Cole's awesome. I have to plug him because I worked with him for so many years and he's awesome. If you want to do an owner build, buy his book and take his course because it's game changer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's see. Patrick, you had a question. I believe they're a middle of the road approach where you are an owner builder, but hire a PM, project manager, or someone with construction experience to orchestrate the subs. Thoughts or experience on that approach?
It's a good keystone for every part of this conversation, right? Because it's really tricky. Who's got the insurance in that PM over subs in an owner builder permit, right? Like, if you're subbing out, even if you only get licensed subcontractors, but now you've got a PM who, let's say that PM, he or she makes a mistake, because stuff happens, right, on these jobs. Something's going to happen. Who's responsible in that setup, and how do you adjudicate it? Like, it's a weird idiosyncratic industry with lots of different players and lots of different responsibilities. And every year somebody comes out and says they're going to revolutionize the whole thing. And they're going to be A to Z, and they're going to change the way it works. And God bless them. I wish they could, but like, be careful when you're doing this build your own team. Like, it's an exact example of what I'm talking about with the team of misfits. And I love Major League. I love Sandlot, but be careful, man.
And that was a good question, Patrick. I know we have just a couple more minutes because we're just going to shut this thing down at 3:00. And I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And one of the things that I feel personally that is not really covered that much is going to be the difference in types of construction. Whether you're doing a stick-built, Title 24, UBC compliant. Title 24 is the energy code for the state of California. We've talked about that a little bit because, sometimes smaller units with lots of pretty windows, and you run the Title 24 calculations, well, they may need to have an insulation in the ceiling that's an R58. It may be a foot deep of insulation to kind of compensate for the sun that's going to be coming in through those windows. That's the Title 24. And using the Uniform Building Code with the various jurisdictions, those all kind of go together with that design and build package for a traditionally built ADU. Then there's the other type that is getting a huge amount of time and energy and money spent advertising and soliciting people, and that's the Title 25 manufactured home. There's a couple big companies that are out there saying that they have their ADUs, they're going to give them to you, but they do not properly, in my opinion, disclose the fact that it is a Title 25 built manufactured home. It's built to the codes are great. As a HUD code, it's HCD, administered locally on the state level. I shouldn't say locally, the state level. But you should know what you're getting, because as we've been talking about all the little different components, whether it's the improper insurance, saying what you're going to be doing, when you're going to be doing it, what type of loan product you're doing, and whether you're going to be getting, you're using the A-team or the Sandlot. The Title 25 manufactured homes have other critical components like a 433A. And for those who don't know, 433As are permanent foundation systems that will record the manufactured home to the land, so now it becomes one with your property. And I again have not seen those things kind of come up, but as somebody who's been in the industry for so long, I'm just like, all these little red flags are kind of coming up with. But but they're very good, solid products, and I endorse both of them. The one that I am really concerned about, and I would love to get Ryan's opinion on this, are those companies that are also spending a lot of money and are advertising these things that'll come to your property and you can just plug them in. And you don't need a permit to have them put on there. And if you drill down just a little bit below the surface, you find out that they're being built to the RV codes. And so I'm like, oh my goodness. And people on the group are saying, oh, I got one. It's not built to the RV code. Oh yeah, I guess it is. I'm like, so those are things that I'm worried about, that people are not, the vendor, the seller, the provider is definitely not making it known. And the people that are saying you can do it for $50,000, you can get an ADU starting at $50,000.
You're going to have to move it off your property if you want to sell it, because you can't sell it. It's not a permittable thing. It's like a tiny home. You cannot sell that ADU and that property. You're going to have to get it off before you try to sell your property.
Thank you, Hillary.
I literally just had someone have to do that in San Diego. They got a RV spec. It was $49,000, and they went to go sell it, and the county said, it's not permitted dwelling, and it's a car. Get it off the site. You cannot sell this property until you do. So that is something to consider. It changes the resale value of your property.
Yeah, that's the classic. Is it an appreciating asset like a house, or is it a thing that just lost half its value when it showed up? Guys, I don't want to sound like sometimes I sound like I'm making fun of folks. And here's the thing. You got to know again, you're the main character of your story. If what you need is a caretaker trailer and motorized trailer makes the most sense for you, then obviously do that. It's much cheaper, and maybe that's what you need in life. And we all have a lot of needs right now that we're discovering. If what you're trying to do is build an investment on your property that's going to be there for decades, lodge a family member, create some security for yourself, be an appreciating asset, there's a very specific path to getting that. and anybody who's selling you something that sounds too good to be true, spend serious time interrogating it. It is free to go into the group and go, hey, what do people think about this? And kind of put the cheerleaders aside. Like, it's great that there are fans of different products, but then like look at the criticisms and go, is this a real criticism? Is it valid? Let me go ask the manufacturer for like to disprove this. And just interrogate it. It's worth the savings if it's true. And if it's not true, it's worth doing the research.
Yeah. So thank you for answering those. Hillary, I did not know that you had to move it off the property.
It's like a think about it this way. A manufactured home is considered a vehicle in the eyes of the lending world. It is a detitled asset. So when you put a manufactured home on a site,
RV or a manufactured home?
Both. When you put a manufactured home on site, you have to detitle it. So there's an actual title change that goes
with the 433A.
Yes, sir. And because of that, the lending laws around it are different. Now, you can have a manufactured home, no problem, resell it, you're totally fine. But if you do something like what's considered an RV and you put it on the site of the property and a mortgage lender comes in to help somebody buy that property up, the mortgage lender is going to say, I can't finance that RV, I can't finance. It's not a financeable asset. You got to get it off the site. Not that it's not a great thing for people. Like you said, Ryan, might be an awesome solution for 10 years for somebody. Great. Simply be prepared that if you go to sell that site, whatever that is, the county's going to say, mm-mm, and the lender's going to say, nope. And everyone's going to have to get up in arms and move that off the site in order for the property to be saleable.
Yeah, thank you for that, Hilly. I think the one thing, too, as we kind of wrap up, is I've seen recently on Twitter is that some housing affordability advocates are mentioning that certain cities like LA and some other Northern California city are allowing RVs to be placed for housing. And I get that they're inexpensive, but they're not a long-term solution. And I think that there are ways to be able to provide long-term permanent structures. And I just wish that the state and our elected officials would look at that as opposed to temporary fixes. Clint, Hillary, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. This has been so much better than I would have hoped for. For everybody that's still here with us, thank you for participating in the chat. We were going to send you a survey out that says if there's anything else that you'd like us to cover, if you'd like to do it again, or just any sort of feedback that would help us out, we'd appreciate it. Also, too, I know that we'll be putting it on we'll be reposting this, and I know I'm pretty confident Ryan may consider doing that as well, too. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.